Mark drove slowly down the tree-lined streets of Willow Creek, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over freshly mowed lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges. It looked like any other suburban neighborhood, quiet, orderly, almost too perfect. His new house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a modest two-story with cream siding and dark green shutters. Mark's chest tightened, with a mix of excitement and relief. After years of apartment living, this was his chance to finally build something solid, a home where he could breathe. He unloaded boxes with a smile, already imagining the fresh paint on the walls and the new deck he planned to build. But before he could step inside, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me, you must be the new resident." Mark turned toward the source. A woman stood on the sidewalk, her posture rigid, eyes cold behind oversized sunglasses. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, and she wore a crisp navy blazer that screamed authority. This was Gloria, the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, or so he had been warned by the realtor. "I'm Gloria. I oversee the HOA," she said briskly, extending a hand. Mark hesitated to shake. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I wanted to personally welcome you and discuss the HOA guidelines you'll need to follow." Mark nodded, still smiling politely. "Thanks. I've heard good things about Willow Creek." Gloria's smile was thin, almost a smirk. "We like things orderly here. Every property must conform to the guidelines. No exceptions." Mark felt a chill. He'd heard whispers about Gloria's reputation. A stickler for rules. Some said a control freak. But it was just HOA stuff, right? He wasn't one to cause trouble. "Of course," Mark said. "I'm actually planning some renovations. New deck, maybe a fence." Gloria's eyes narrowed. "I see. Before you start, you'll need to sign this." She handed him a thick folder labeled Willow Creek Renovation Agreement. Mark flipped through it quickly. The rules seemed stricter than he expected. Color restrictions, height limits, even rules about what kinds of wood could be used. Then his eyes caught a clause about shared power rights. Vague, almost sinister. "What's this about shared power rights?" Mark asked. Gloria's smile vanished. "It means the HOA retains ultimate authority over all modifications. You can't act unilaterally. This protects the community's appearance." Mark felt uneasy, but shrugged. "Sounds fair enough." "Good," Gloria said smoothly. "Sign here. Remember, the board monitors all projects closely." Mark signed, trying not to let the unease show. Over the next few days, Mark unpacked and began sketching his deck plans. But almost immediately, strange things started happening. Flyers warning about unauthorized renovations appeared on his doorstep. A neighbor, Mrs. Hawkins, warned him in hushed tones. "Gloria's watching. Better be careful what you start." Then came the first letter, a formal notice from the HOA claiming his plans violated an obscure sightline rule. The letter demanded he stop work immediately or face fines. Mark was stunned. He hadn't even started building. He tried to contact Gloria to discuss the misunderstanding, but his calls went unanswered. Instead, he got a terse email. "All renovations must be approved in writing. Failure to comply will result in penalties." Suspicion crept in. Why was Gloria targeting him so aggressively? Was this just about rules, or something more? One evening, Mark sat on his porch, staring at the perfectly trimmed hedge, separating his yard from Gloria's stately home across the street. He realized this wasn't the friendly neighborhood he had dreamed of. It was a cage, and Gloria held the key. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark clenched his fists. He had no idea how far Gloria would go to control his power. But he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her win. The morning light spilled into Mark's kitchen, but there was no warmth in the room. Instead, a chill settled deep in his bones. The letter from the HOA sat on the counter, a fresh blow to his dreams, this time accusing him of improper storage of construction materials and threatening a hefty fine. Mark rubbed his eyes and sighed. It was clear now, Gloria wasn't just enforcing rules. She was waging a silent war. But why? Determined not to be bullied, Mark called Gloria's number again. This time, a curt voice answered. The board does not discuss enforcement via phone. Submit all requests in writing. Frustrated, but not defeated, Mark typed a careful email, requesting a detailed explanation of the violations. Days passed with no response. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread through Willow Creek. Neighbors looked at Mark with a mixture of pity and fear. He overheard snippets at the mailbox. She's crushed 2 families already. Lost their homes. And worse. Don't make her angry. The community, once so vibrant and welcoming, had turned into a maze of suspicious glances and half-spoken warnings. One afternoon, Mark noticed a black SUV parked near his driveway. Inside sat a man he hadn't seen before, watching him intently. When Mark approached, the man vanished without a word. It was the first real sign that Gloria's reach extended beyond official letters and fines. Determined to push back, Mark started documenting everything. Photos of his property, copies of letters, notes on every interaction. He even set up a small camera, hidden near his front porch. If Gloria was playing dirty, he'd be ready. Days later, Gloria called an emergency HOA meeting at the clubhouse. Mark decided to attend, hoping to confront her and find support among his neighbors. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Faces? Mark had smiled, at now avoided eye contact. Gloria stood at the podium, radiating control and confidence. Willow Creek is a community built on trust and order, she declared. Rules exist to protect our property values and our way of life. Those who defy them threaten us all. Mark raised his hand. With all due respect, Gloria, I think some rules are being used to intimidate homeowners. There's no transparency, and decisions feel personal. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Gloria's eyes locked onto Mark's. I'm here to protect this neighborhood, Mr. Daniels. If you think otherwise, maybe you don't belong here. A heavy silence followed. Mark felt the weight of dozens of eyes, some sympathetic, others cold. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached Mark quietly. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman, whispered, "She ruined my son's family, took their savings. You're brave, but be careful." Mark's heart pounded. Gloria's control wasn't just about property. It was about power, and she wielded it ruthlessly. That night, Mark sat alone, scrolling through local news archives. To his shock, he uncovered a pattern. Gloria had led the HOA for over a decade, and every few years, a homeowner fighting her authority mysteriously left town, often after losing costly lawsuits or foreclosures. His unease deepened. This was no ordinary HOA president. She was a tyrant disguised behind polite smiles and bylaws. Mark stared at the folder of documents he'd collected. It was time to fight fire with fire. The next day, Mark started reaching out to former residents who had left Willow Creek under strange circumstances. A few responded, sharing chilling stories of harassment, threats, and financial ruin. Mark's resolve hardened. Gloria's iron grip was suffocating an entire community, but he had uncovered her cracks. If he played his cards right, he could expose the truth. But Gloria was watching, and Mark's every move might already be under her scrutiny. Mark's phone buzzed softly in the quiet of his living room. A message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. She sees everything. The word sent a shiver down his spine. He wasn't just fighting an overbearing HOA president anymore. He was up against something far darker. Determined not to back down, Mark arranged a discreet meeting with Helen, an elderly woman who had lived in Willow Creek for nearly 30 years. They met at a small cafe on the edge of town, away from the watchful eyes of the neighborhood. Helen's eyes darted nervously around the room as she spoke in a low whisper. Gloria's grip on this place. It's more than just rules. She controls the board, the finances, even some local businesses. People who cross her end up with ruined credit, legal troubles. Some just disappear. Mark swallowed hard. Disappear. Helen nodded grimly. Not literally, but they're forced out. Foreclosure, harassment, even personal threats. I know a family who had to sell their home at a loss because Gloria wouldn't approve their renovations. It's a pattern. Mark's mind raced. He realized the HOA wasn't just about enforcing guidelines. It was a weapon Gloria used to control, intimidate, and profit. Helen slid a worn folder across the table. Inside were copies of old newsletters, letters, and even photos of homeowners who had left under mysterious circumstances. This is all I could keep after I left the board. I had to get out when I saw how deep it went. Mark flipped through the documents, each page revealing more about Gloria's reign. Secret meetings, unauthorized fees, and a shadowy network of enforcers who made sure no one stepped out of line. But what unsettled Mark most was a set of photographs, grainy images of a man in a dark suit lurking near homeowners' properties, taking pictures, watching their every move. Who is he? Mark asked. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. Nobody knows. Some say he's Gloria's personal security. Others think he's involved in something worse. People call him the Watcher. The name stuck in Mark's mind like a poison. It explained the black SUV he had seen, the feeling of being watched. That night, Mark reviewed his own security footage. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Birds fluttering, neighbors passing by. Then, in the corner of the frame, a shadow moved. A figure in a dark jacket, standing just beyond his fence, staring directly at his porch. Mark's pulse quickened. He wasn't paranoid. Gloria's watcher was real. The next day, Mark approached a few neighbors cautiously, testing the waters. Most clammed up, eyes flickering with fear. But one man, Tom, finally spoke. Gloria's not just president. She's the queen. Cross her and you'll regret it. The board has people watching us. Neighbors spying on neighbors, reporting back to her. Mark's suspicions were confirmed. The entire community was under surveillance, trapped in a web of fear and control. That evening, Mark received another message on his phone. This time a photo. His own house with the lights on, taken from a distance. No words, just the image. His stomach churned. Gloria was sending a warning, but instead of retreating, Mark's resolve burned hotter than ever. If Gloria's power came from fear and secrecy, then he would shine a light into the darkest corners. He started compiling evidence, documents, photos, testimonials, all carefully hidden on a secure cloud drive. Mark knew the risks. He had already felt Gloria's cold gaze, heard the whispers, and seen the threat lurking in every shadow. Yet something deep inside told him this was bigger than a renovation dispute. It was about justice, about reclaiming a community from a tyrant, and Mark was ready to fight. But little did he know, Gloria had already anticipated his moves, and she was preparing her next strike. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, but Mark hardly noticed. His mind was racing, replaying the message he'd received just before dawn. A photo of his house, this time with a circle drawn around his front porch, and beneath it, the chilling words, "Last warning." It wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was a threat. Mark knew Gloria was ruthless, but now she was crossing a line. The day started with a loud, aggressive knock at the front door. Mark opened it to find a man in a dark suit holding a clipboard. "Good morning, sir. I'm with the Willow Creek HOA enforcement. We've received complaints about hazardous conditions on your property." Mark blinked. Hazardous conditions? What complaints? The man waved a letter toward him. It was another violation notice, this time accusing Mark of unsafe storage of construction materials, demanding immediate removal, and threatening escalating fines that could reach into the thousands. Mark felt his stomach twist. These accusations were absurd. His yard was clean, his materials neatly stacked. "Who filed these complaints?" Mark asked, voice steady but tense. The man shrugged. "Anonymous reports. We're obligated to investigate." Mark shut the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. This was no coincidence. Gloria's tactics had escalated beyond bureaucracy. Now she was weaponizing anonymous complaints and legal threats to break him down. Later that week, Mark's car was vandalized. Slashed tires, scratched paint. His neighbors watched in silence, some with pity, others with fear. No one dared speak openly, not with Gloria's shadow looming over them. Mark felt isolated, but refused to back down. He called a meeting with his allies, the few homeowners, who had quietly banded together, united by their shared frustration and fear. "We can't fight this alone," Mark told them, voice firm. "She's targeting us one by one. We need to expose her. To take this beyond the HOA board." The group nodded, determination flickering in their eyes, despite the risk. But as Mark prepared to gather more evidence, Gloria struck again. One night, as Mark returned home late, he found his front yard vandalized. Spray-painted warnings on his fence. "Stay out or else." The message was clear. Gloria wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. She was fighting a war. Fear gnawed at the edges of Mark's resolve, but he steeled himself. This was a test. How far was Gloria willing to go? And how much was he willing to risk? With growing urgency, Mark began reaching out beyond Willow Creek. Local journalists, legal experts, even civil rights groups. He hoped to shine a light on Gloria's abuses and protect himself and his neighbors. But Gloria wasn't blind to these moves. She intensified her campaign, flooding the neighborhood with even more aggressive letters, threatening liens and foreclosure on anyone who dared defy her. One afternoon, Mark received a call from his bank. His mortgage was suddenly in jeopardy due to an unpaid HOA lien. Panic surged through him. This was no accident. Gloria was using every tool at her disposal to squeeze him out. The tension exploded at the next HOA meeting. Gloria took the podium with a victorious smile. "We're simply enforcing the rules that protect our community," she said, eyes cold as steel. "Anyone refusing to comply is risking their home." Mark stood, voice loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "This isn't about rules. It's about control. You're abusing your power to bully and intimidate." A stunned silence fell over the room. Gloria's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, dangerous glare. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped. "You're all warned." Mark knew then that this battle was no longer about renovations or fines. It was about exposing a corrupt empire, built on fear. And Gloria was ready to fight dirty. But Mark wasn't alone anymore. The community was watching, waiting. The first blow had landed. but the war was just beginning. Mark sat hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his study. The hum of the computer, the only sound in the house. The last few weeks had been a relentless storm. Threats, vandalism, and endless legal battles. But tonight, he was on the verge of something different, a breakthrough. He'd been digging through files, digital correspondence, and scanned letters he'd collected from HOA meetings, complaints and notices. Patterns began to emerge. Dates, amounts, names. And buried deep in the data, he found something that made his heart skip. Emails. Not ordinary emails, but hacked communications between Gloria and an unknown third party. The messages revealed plans to manipulate homeowners' insurance claims, falsify inspection reports, and funnel HOA funds into private accounts. There was even mention of surveillance equipment being installed around the neighborhood, operated by a shadowy figure, called only as the Watcher. Mark leaned back, astonished. This was no petty HOA squabble. Gloria was running a criminal operation right under everyone's noses. He knew this evidence alone could bring down Gloria, if it reached the right people. But how? Mark contacted a trusted friend from college, Rachel, now a cybersecurity expert. After hours of encrypted calls and secure file transfers, Rachel confirmed the authenticity of the emails and agreed to help him compile a case. "We need to get this to the feds," Rachel warned. "But be careful. If Gloria suspects you have this, she'll come after you hard." The stakes had never been higher. Mark's phone buzzed, a new anonymous message. "Stop digging, or else." His fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart pounding. But Mark wasn't about to stop. Instead, he tightened security around his home, installing cameras, encrypting his data, and only meeting his allies in secure, private places. At the same time, he started quietly gathering testimony from neighbors willing to speak. Those who had suffered financial ruin or intimidation. One by one, stories poured in. Secret fines, fabricated violations, mysterious surveillance. The pattern was undeniable. 1. Afternoon, while reviewing footage from his hidden porch camera, Mark noticed a black SUV again. The same one he'd seen months ago, but this time, the vehicle parked near Gloria's house, and a man in a dark jacket exited with a briefcase, slipping into her office. Mark's pulse quickened. This wasn't just local power. This was organized. Dangerous. He shared the footage with Rachel, who promised to analyze metadata and trace any digital footprints. Meanwhile, Mark prepared a detailed report for the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the FBI's local office. Days later, Mark got a call from a federal agent named Parker. "Mr. Daniels, we've been monitoring the situation. Your evidence is compelling. We're planning a formal investigation." Relief and fear mixed in Mark's chest. This was the moment Gloria had feared, and perhaps the beginning of the end. But Gloria was no fool. She had already mobilized her defenses, tightening the HOA's grip and threatening neighbors who might cooperate. One evening, Mark returned home to find his mailbox stuffed with threatening letters, warning him to drop the investigation or face consequences worse than fines. Mark's hand shook as he read the last line. "We see you. We're watching." That night, lying awake, Mark realized the real battle was just beginning. Gloria's power was vast, her reach deep. Yet Mark was armed with the truth. And now, with the feds on his side, he had a secret weapon. The fortress Gloria had built was cracking, and soon it would crumble. The sound of a knock at the door jolted Mark from his restless sleep. It was early morning, the sky still tinged with grey. His heart thumped wildly as he opened the door to find two stern-faced federal agents standing there. "Mr. Daniels?" one asked, flashing a badge. "We're here to discuss the Willow Creek HOA investigation. May we come in?" Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. After months of secret fears and silent threats, the government had finally arrived. Inside, the agents set up laptops and began reviewing the files Mark had meticulously compiled. They asked questions, took notes, and seemed impressed with the volume and detail of evidence. "This goes beyond HOA mismanagement," one said grimly. "This looks like a criminal enterprise, fraud, extortion, even illegal surveillance." Mark felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that the truth was finally being seen, but dread over what Gloria might do if she knew the feds were involved. Days passed with a strange calm settling over Willow Creek. But beneath the surface, the neighborhood was shifting. Neighbors who once feared Gloria began speaking more openly, sharing whispered warnings and hidden stories. Mark's small group of allies grew, as others found courage in the possibility of justice. But Gloria wasn't defeated. She summoned the board for an emergency meeting, her voice cold and unyielding. "This investigation is a witch hunt," she declared. "Anyone cooperating with outsiders will be expelled from the community. We will not tolerate betrayal." Her words sent a ripple of fear. Yet for the first time, many saw her for what she was, a tyrant whose reign was fueled by fear and secrecy. Meanwhile, federal agents began canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing residents, and auditing HOA financial records. They uncovered shell companies tied to Gloria, secret bank accounts, and falsified documents meant to justify exorbitant fees and liens. Mark watched as Gloria's carefully constructed empire began to unravel piece by piece, but Gloria still had a few cards to play. One evening, Mark received a mysterious package at his door. A small, unmarked box containing a USB drive. Hesitant but curious, he plugged it into his laptop and found encrypted files hinting at personal information on several homeowners, including bank statements, private communications, even blackmail material. It was clear Gloria had been gathering dirt to maintain control, and she wasn't above using it. Mark forwarded the files to the agents and shared the news with his allies. The stakes had never been higher. As federal pressure mounted, Gloria's tactics grew more desperate and dangerous. Neighbors reported late-night visits from unfamiliar cars, strange noises outside their homes, and anonymous threats delivered in the dead of night. Mark knew the investigation was close to exposing everything, but he also knew the danger was escalating. One night, as he reviewed documents, the power in his house flickered and went out. In the darkness, Mark's phone buzzed with a final chilling message. "Stop now, or lose everything." He swallowed his fear. He wasn't just fighting for his home anymore. He was fighting to free an entire community from the shadows of tyranny, and the federal storm was only just beginning. The sound of sirens shattered the early morning calm in Willow Creek. Mark stood on his porch, heart pounding, as a convoy of federal agents, backed by local law enforcement, swarmed the neighborhood. Search warrants were being executed simultaneously across homes tied to the HOA board and Gloria's associates. Gloria's empire was finally under siege. Mark watched as agents entered Gloria's stately home, evidence bags in hand, seizing computers, files, and electronics. The neighbors, once hushed and fearful, gathered on sidewalks, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Inside the federal command van, parked at the end of the street, Mark was briefed by Agent Parker. "We've uncovered extensive evidence of fraud illegal surveillance, and coercion. Parker said grimly, "Gloria and her inner circle are facing serious charges. But we expect resistance. She's ruthless." Mark's phone buzzed. A flood of messages from neighbors now willing to testify, emboldened by the raid. Stories poured in of intimidation, forged documents, and threats to families. The media had caught wind of the investigation, and reporters flocked to Willow Creek, shining a harsh spotlight on the once pristine community. But Gloria was not ready to surrender. That afternoon, Mark received an ominous call. "You've made a grave mistake, Daniels," a cold voice warned. "If you think this ends well for you, think again." Mark's pulse quickened, but he stood firm. As the days unfolded, the federal investigation peeled back layer after layer of corruption. Gloria's network of informants, the Watcher, was identified as a private investigator with ties to a security firm known for intimidation tactics. His surveillance footage was submitted as evidence, revealing the extent of the HOA's intrusive reach into residents' lives. Mark's evidence had cracked open the facade, and the dominoes were falling fast, but then came the twist. During a late-night meeting with Agent Parker, Mark was handed a file marked "Confidential." Inside were emails suggesting that Gloria's reach extended beyond Willow Creek, possibly connecting her to a wider network of corrupt officials and developers manipulating HOAs and communities for profit across the state. "This isn't just local corruption," Parker explained. "This could be a statewide conspiracy." Mark realized his battle had just become much bigger and more dangerous. Before he could process the news, his phone rang again. The caller ID was blocked. "Mark!" Gloria's voice hissed. "You think you're winning? You have no idea what you've unleashed." Mark's hand trembled as he ended the call. The fight was far from over. But now, armed with the truth and a powerful ally in the federal government, Mark knew the time had come to finish what he started. The reckoning was near. The courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, and officials. The trial of Gloria Matthews, once the untouchable queen of Willow Creek, had become a symbol of justice against corruption. Mark sat quietly in the front row, his hands clenched tightly, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally break free. The prosecution laid out its case with relentless precision. The forged documents, the illegal fees, the blackmail, and the covert surveillance. Witness after witness, neighbors, former board members, and even Gloria's own former enforcers took the stand, revealing a tangled web of deception. But just when it seemed the trial was a straightforward case of abuse of power, Gloria's defense attorney dropped a bombshell. "There is substantial evidence suggesting that Mr. Daniels orchestrated this entire investigation for personal gain." The attorney argued. He exploited his neighbor's fears and manipulated federal authorities with doctored evidence. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Mark's heart sank. The defense unveiled emails, edited and twisted, designed to discredit Mark and paint him as a troublemaker who had a hidden agenda, possibly financial or political. Mark's allies exchanged worried glances. The fight wasn't just for truth anymore. It was for his reputation. But the judge allowed the case to proceed, demanding proof from both sides. In a tense moment, Rachel, the cybersecurity expert, took the stand. With calm authority, she detailed the forensic analysis of the emails, exposing the defense's fabrications and validating the authenticity of the evidence Mark had gathered. The tide began to turn. Days later, as the trial neared its end, an unexpected visitor arrived at Mark's home. Agent Parker, with a sealed envelope. "We found something that Gloria didn't anticipate," Parker said quietly. "Financial records linking her to a high-profile developer with a history of fraud. This could be the key to unraveling the entire network." Mark opened the envelope and stared at the documents. It was bigger than he'd imagined. This was no longer just about Willow Creek. It was about systemic corruption. But before Mark could celebrate, his phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "You're close. Watch your back." The tension was palpable, but Mark felt an unshakable resolve. On the final day of the trial, the judge delivered the verdict. Gloria Matthews was found guilty on multiple counts: fraud, extortion, illegal surveillance, and abuse of power. She faced decades in prison. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and shock. As Gloria was led away in handcuffs, she shot Mark a final chilling glare. "This isn't over," she whispered. But for Mark and the community, it was a new beginning. In the weeks that followed, the federal investigation expanded, exposing a network of corrupt officials and unscrupulous developers tied to Gloria's schemes. Willow Creek began the slow process of healing, with new leadership committed to transparency and fairness. Mark became a local hero, not because he sought power, but because he refused to be silenced. Yet the anonymous messages never stopped. One evening, as Mark stood on his porch, his phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number. "The Watcher isn't gone. He's just waiting." Mark smiled grimly. The fight for justice was never truly over. But this time, he was ready.